In 1934, Alcatraz Island was transformed from a military base into a maximum security federal prison, which is known as the Rock because of its location on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. It was designed to make escape impossible, and this was clear from the history of failed escapes that prisoners tried over the years. The prison itself was intended to accommodate the most dangerous criminals in America who no other prison could handle, and for this reason the security was very tight, with watchtowers and searchlights monitoring the place day and night, and highly trained guards. All the corridors were full of alarms, and any unusual movement, the guards would move immediately and fill the place, and even the water around the island was part of the guard. The water was cold all year round, in addition to the strong water jets which would pull anyone who tried to swim in it. And on top of all that, it was also said that there were sharks in it. It wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol of fear and terror, and the prisoners who were locked in you, they would tell tragic stories of despair. What they lived every day, the thick cement walls and narrow cells, the long nights, and the sound of the waves crashing into the rocky shore of the island, a place like it came out of Jabus. And for this reason, any attempt to escape from it was considered madness. And since the beginning of its opening in 1934, many prisoners tried to escape, but most of them ended up either dying or being shot. And every escape attempt was failing and increasing. Simple prison. Escape from it is impossible, and despair and frustration increase for any prisoner who thinks even to himself of escaping. And let me tell you about the most famous attempts that failed to show you the difficulty of escaping. Or an escape attempt from Alcatraz was in 1936. Prisoner Joseph Bowers was tasked with burning garbage in the prison incinerator, and on April 27, while he was working normally, he suddenly decided to run and start climbing the iron fence that is on the edge of the island, and it was very clear that he was trying to escape. So when the tower guards noticed what was happening, they started calling him and asking him to come down immediately. But Joseph did not respond to their orders and continued. So at that time the guards beat. The fire and hit her, and the injury made him fall from a very high height. And the incident was of course violent and caused him serious injuries that he died from, and Bowers' story was later known as the escape. Despair, and what it shows how much the prisoners were willing to risk everything in the hope of escaping. A year later, on the 16th of December 1937, two prisoners, Ralph Rowe and John, were working in the prison workshop. Over a long period of time, they were able to saw the iron bars that closed the workshop window. One day, the weather was very foggy, that the fog literally covered the entire island, so they decided to escape on that day. They actually took advantage of the fog and started sneaking out of the prison through the workshop window. As soon as they reached the edge, they jumped into the water. After that moment, no one saw them again. But the point is that that day was not just foggy. The weather conditions were very difficult, the water planes were very violent, and the bitter cold was unbearable. So the authorities assumed that they drowned, but when their bodies did not appear, they said that the planes might have towed them away. So as a precaution, they put them on the most wanted list. Another year passed almost. On the night of Friday, January 13, 1939, an escape attempt would take place. It would also end tragically. The five prisoners, Arthur Parker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stanfill, were known to be among the most dangerous prisoners in Alcatraz and were locked in the most secure part of the entire prison. But despite that, they managed one day to escape from their cells using some tools. They made them themselves after they succeeded in getting out. They moved quickly and quietly towards the island's beach, and the plan was that they would build a boat using some materials they had collected. And when they reached the beach, they actually started building it and preparing to escape. But while they were working as watchtower guards, they noticed a strange movement happening on the beach, and as soon as they realized what was happening, they started shooting at the prisoners from all directions, and Arthur was fatally injured and died at that moment, and this is what escaped. He was seriously injured but lived. The remaining three prisoners were arrested and completely isolated after that, and the guards on them became more tight than before. A few years passed, during which some simple attempts occurred, all of which also failed until we reached April 14, 1943 AD. On that day, a bold escape attempt occurred by four prisoners who were also working in the prison workshop, namely James Bowman, Harold Brest, Floyd Hamilton, and Fred Hunter. The four, while working in the workshop, carried out the same campaign. They cut the iron bars on the window of Workshop 11 and stole. Bags of the guards' clothes were brought to them to use as floats to ride on while escaping. On the night of the escape, the prisoners beat two of the guards and tied their hands and feet, and then escaped through the window. But during the escape, one of the guards was able to untie his embassy, and the other guard began whistling with it. As soon as the guards in the watchtower heard the embassy, they began shooting at the prisoners. Shams Borman was shot and fell into the water and lost consciousness. But Harold B. He followed him and held him while he floated on the back. But when he approached the prison, he approached them. Priest was forced to leave him in the hope that he would be able to escape and drown James in the water, and his body would not be found after that. At the same time that this was happening, Frida Hunter was injured in his back and hands and lost hope of being able to swim and decided to hide in a cave on the island. But after 2 hours of searching, the guards were able to find him because of the traces of blood that were at the entrance to the cave, and as soon as they surrounded him, he immediately surrendered and was arrested. The only one left after all this story was Floyd Hamilton, who at first the guards thought had drowned just like Borman. But the truth is that Hamilton was hiding in the same cave where Hunter was. But after waiting 2 days in the cave, despair took over him and he decided to return to the same window he had escaped from and hide in the storeroom, and was caught the next day right away. And in the end, James Borman paid the price with his life, and Priest, Hunter and Hamilton were arrested and returned to prison again with penalties. From the beginning, 2 years passed during which more than one attempt occurred. All of them also failed early until we reached the year 1946, when one of the most violent escape attempts in the history of Alcatraz prison occurred, which was later known as the Battle of Alcatraz. In the period between May 2nd and May 4, a group of prisoners tried to escape, namely Bernard Coy, Joseph Kritzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Miran Thompson, the 6 prisoners. Their plan was to control the cell area, and after they did so, they overpowered the guards, reached the weapons room, and seized everything in it. And the plan was for them to escape via the prison boat itself. But when they could not open the external door of the prison, they decided to confront, and a battle took place in which they were able to hold 2 of the prison guards hostage. And after 2 days of violent clashes, Joseph Kritzer shot the hostages with him, and with the escalation and continuation of the issue, Shockley, Thompson and Krenz despaired of the escape attempt and returned to their cells again, while Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer and Marvin Hubbard refused to surrender. And the battle was so fierce that the US Navy intervened. After violent confrontations, the US forces were able to kill the 3 prisoners. After the battle ended, Shockley, Thompson and Krenz were tried for killing the prison guards, and Shockley and Thompson were sentenced to death. As for Krenz, who was 19 years old at the time, he was sentenced to life in prison. And after that, how many other attempts were made? They all failed quickly. The failed escape attempt that I told you all shows the difficulty of escaping from prison. Every attempt failed. It increased the reputation of the prison that escape is impossible, and sent a message to the rest of the prisoners that escape is not only impossible, your very lives will be at stake. But all of this will change. In 1962, specifically on the night of June 11th, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin